good group here, so we can go ahead and get started. We may have a few more folks join us once we get going. But thank you everyone for joining us again for the Near Southeast Steering Committee meeting for October. Let me share my screen here. All right, meeting number 14. Just want to give a brief update on where we are on the project, then talk about the upcoming phase 4 of community engagement, when we'll share the public review draft, and then go over some of the key land use recommendations and maps that we've been putting together and get your feedback on those. So starting with the project update, we have wrapped up phase 3 engagement. That was review of the draft recommendations. So we are going through all of that. We've gone through most of it. We have a few more things that came in late that we're going through and incorporating all of that input into updates to the draft recommendations and putting those into the draft plan document, which we are currently working on making and should be ready for community review in November. I'll go over a little more of what that is going to look like coming up, but following the community review around the draft plan, we'll take feedback on that, make updates and improvements to the draft plan document, and then still aiming to get the plan adopted in the first half of next year. So that'll be the final phase of the planning project. So let's talk quickly about the phase 4 engagement. We are aiming for the week of November 14th to get the draft plan out. So that would be the week before Thanksgiving. So folks have something to do on the Friday after Thanksgiving. But we are looking at holding the community workshop in person, where we will sort of introduce the plan and take feedback and let people review a lot of it the first full week of December. Find that things tend to be calm in between and early December, in between Thanksgiving and the holidays. So we think that's a good week to hold the community workshop and then hold a virtual workshop probably in early January, once folks have had time to really review the plan and can come in with questions or concerns and have a good community discussion around that in early January. And then give a couple more weeks for folks to provide comments and feedback on the draft plan before we sort of wrap things up in mid-January, so we can start making those updates and get it ready for the adoption process. So along with those community meetings and the online surveys, we'll also be doing office hours, continuing our intentional engagement, reaching out to renters and other folks that we need to hear more from. We will attend any community events that are going on during that time, as we've done. Don't have any identified at this point, but if anyone knows of anything that would be good for us to come to, let us know. And also community organization meetings. We want to reach out to all the RNOs and other groups in the area and offer to come to their meetings or provide information for them so they have an opportunity to learn about the plan and provide feedback on the draft plan. So that's what we will be aiming for the phase 4 draft plan review. So any questions or comments on any of that? We know you're doing it over the holidays. People may be a bit distracted, but we want to give plenty of time, launching it in mid-November, going through sort of mid-January. We think even with the holidays, that's enough time for folks to engage with it and provide good feedback. Judy. Are you there, Judy?
Yeah, here I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just wondering how this latest proposal for a huge development between Cherry Creek Drive South Cherry Creek Drive South and Mississippi on the border of Glendale affects this plan.
Yeah, so that, they are proposing to develop that under the existing zoning. We would like them to rezone, and we've encouraged them to hold off on moving forward with this and participate in this planning process and take those recommendations from the plan into consideration as they figure out what to do with that property. I know Councilman Cashman just recently had a conversation with the developers. I don't know if he wants to add anything more to that.
Yeah, sure, Scott. Thank you. I spoke with the developers today. They've told me that the plan that they presented was a plan from 2006 and that they intend to rework that plan. It will be less dense, and they expect to have a proposal, a revised proposal in a few weeks that will not include 20 stories.
My concern is, one of my concerns is the density, of course, and what happens with traffic in there as well. But
Sure.
even more so is that where those apartments are between Cherry Creek South Drive and Mississippi are lots of trees and a real green space.
Yeah.
I would certainly hate to see that go away. I mean, that's a tremendous asset to the area, and to replace it with brick and mortar just does not make sense to me at all.
Right. Yeah, we talked about that, Judy, and these old zonings under the old Chapter 59 code are something that will be addressed, a way forward will be addressed as part of this plan.
Well, I did receive your newsletter, Paul, and I was very happy to see what your comments were on that development. So thank you for your work on this. Appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thanks, Judy. Good question. Any other questions or comments around upcoming engagement or the schedule overall or anything like that? All right, moving on then. So want to get into the land use and built form framework and draft recommendations. Just want to remind everyone, these are still very much draft. A lot of these are sort of first draft. So we want to get your feedback on them and make improvements. These will change as we go forward. So if anything really sticks out as totally wrong, please let us know, because it very well could be a mistake on our part or just a bad idea that we had. And also with that in mind, try to, as you talk to your friends and neighbors about this, keep that in mind, that don't try to, if you see something that you don't like, recognize that it very well could change. And so, encourage folks to participate in the upcoming engagement and try to get them interested. But if we could avoid trying to scare folks too much with some of these things, that would be appreciated. Because like I said, they will change. So we don't want to get people really upset or excited about something that you see here that may not make it into the public review draft.
Okay, so this deck will not be up on the website?
That's a good question. I think, yes, we will probably not put this up on the website, but it is a public document. And so if needed, we can put big draft watermarks over it and make sure that it's
because there's there's a good portion of the steering committee that's not here this evening that I think should have access to this.
Yeah, and I've talked to a couple of folks who said they wouldn't be able to make it tonight, and I've told them I would send them this and give them an opportunity to review it. So
thank you.
So yeah, and so if anybody does want this after we're done tonight, let me know. I'm happy to send it to you, but try not to share it broadly. I'm happy for the steering committee to take a look at this But we don't want this going out to the general public yet, because like I said, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on these things. All right, and with that caveat, we can get started. So starting sort of at the high level, wanted to remind everyone of sort of what the key goals of the plan overall are from what we've heard from the community. So these are really highlighting what we think the main things that this plan should accomplish over the next 20 years are. And so a big part of that is modernizing the centers and corridors, especially Evans Avenue, as we've heard, in terms of what the uses are there, how it looks and feels, how it's designed, and how people move along and through and to these places. Another part is looking at housing and how we can keep and make housing more affordable while providing additional housing options and preserving the character of the neighborhoods that everyone likes. And then we also want to improve the sustainability of the area through making improvements to the way we move, the way our infrastructure works, and how our landscaping and green infrastructure functions. So those are, as we understand it, the sort of the key priorities of the community that this plan should be addressing. Of course, there's a lot of other things that will be in the plan, but sort of keep those in mind as we go through of this is what these recommendations and these maps should be trying to accomplish. And if you feel like we're straying from that, please let us know. I also wanted to remind everyone of the land use vision that we developed about a year ago from that first round of engagement. Again, this is a really big, dense paragraph, but just to highlight that we want an equitable, inclusive, and resilient community that has, the major corridors are complete multimodal networks and have become safe, welcoming, and unique with a lot of local businesses and entertainment options. There's new housing options along the corridors and at the stations and centers. There's a variety of housing types in the neighborhoods that reflect the existing design patterns. There's new housing options, including ADUs, duplexes, and other missing middle that have blended into the neighborhood to help keep the area affordable and provide options for all types of households. That people feel safe navigating to parks and activity centers and community serving businesses. And that we reflect the diversity of Denver with strengthened community ties through events, organizations, and gathering places. So again, the recommendations and everything we're about to go through should be accomplishing this vision over the next 20 years or so. So if there's things we're missing or things we've missed the mark on, let us know. And then wanted to start with what we're calling the land use framework. So this is pulling out a few of the key land use recommendations and sort of showing how they will work together and what those priorities are. So the first one is making sure that we have the infrastructure and regulations in place first for development, that we know we need improvements along these corridors in terms of mobility and infrastructure, and in terms of what the design outcomes will be. So before we sort of open things up and allow a lot of new development, we want to make sure that we're getting ahead of that in terms of the streets, the infrastructure, and the design regulations, both for the centers and corridors and also for what's happening in the neighborhoods. We want to direct most of the growth to the corridors, and particularly the key intersections along those corridors, where we will have that infrastructure in place, and we will make sure that these come in with those mobility and design improvements. So you'll see on the map on the right, those sort of burgundy areas are the areas where we expect to see most of this growth. Those are the local or the community and regional centers that we're calling for. And then the sort of diagonal hash marks are areas where we really want to focus on those infrastructure and design improvements along the corridors. And then in terms of housing, we want to make sure that we are preserving and improving the affordability in the area by preserving the existing small houses and making sure that when new houses and additions come in, they are of similar scale so that we don't have that incentive to scrape existing houses and replace them with much bigger ones. Providing policies to prevent displacement and help folks stay in their homes, improving design overall, including addressing those scale concerns, and adding more housing options. By adding more options throughout the area, most of that will come at these growth areas, but we want to add it across the entire area as well. That will help us address affordability by providing additional options that come in at a variety of types and serving a variety of community members. So we'll get into more detail on all of these as we go forward. But just wanted to stop here and give folks a chance to ask questions or provide feedback on this sort of very high level framework, map, and discussion. Jared.
Yeah, just to clarify, the missing middle looks like 90%. I mean, that's a quick math, dirty math. Why the sections where it is, and maybe why the sections where it's not, and what does missing middle mean? If so, the two questions there. One,
yeah.
Why were certain areas highlighted and certain aren't? And then second, what does that mean?
Yep. So, and like I said, we'll get into more details on that as we go through this. But missing middle is the way we define it is anything between 2 and 19 units. So that's anything from a duplex to a triplex or fourplex to townhomes and row homes up to small apartment buildings. And so not all of those are appropriate everywhere where you see that horizontal hash. And like I said, so there would be more recommendations around what is appropriate in what locations. But we think the areas all of those areas should be considered for some type of missing middle housing. And that is driven by what we've heard from the community. If you remember the survey that was up for phase 3, we asked folks, and we talked about this with you all as well, these options around how to incorporate missing middle housing, whether that's allowing duplexes through most of the neighborhood, whether that's using it as a transition from the centers and corridors, whether that's putting it along some of the larger streets through the neighborhoods. And so we've used that feedback to guide where we think these options should or could be appropriate, and also looked at things like where we have the infrastructure in place to support additional density. And then also looking at how different policies interact with our goals around preservation and our goals around affordability and preventing displacement. So all of these things are working together. And there are, like I said, more nuances in the detailed recommendations we'll get to. Dustin.
Quick one, I might have missed it. When you say building preservation, what do you mean by that?
It can be sort of a range of different things. So at the most basic sense, it is literally preserving the existing structure. So if a house is preserved, that means that it is not torn down, it is maintained as it is. But that can also mean more things around sort of preserving some of the character elements or preserving the look and feel of the area. So even if the existing structure isn't kept, that we have regulations in place so that what is put in place is of similar scale and similar design, maintains some of those design elements that people like about that part of the community.
All right, so it doesn't necessarily mean like it's a historic neighborhood and they're all historic buildings and therefore you can't do anything to them.
Correct. It does not necessarily mean that. These are areas where that could be appropriate if the property owners and the residents in that area wanted to pursue a landmark district. But there's a range of tools that we can use to promote preservation with the landmark district, the historic preservation district at one end. Things like conservation overlays, design overlays, sort of in the middle, and things like just improvements to the zone district and other incentives to keep houses at another end. So we are recommending a sort of suite of tools that could be appropriate in different areas depending on the needs of that section of the community. Jim.
Hey, Scott. Maybe I missed something from an earlier meeting, and if so, I apologize, but tell me a little bit more, or tell all of us a little bit more about the term growth areas and where they are designated here. What I want to know is, does that mean it's a prediction, it's a guess, it's a hunch, is a plan? What does that mean?
Yeah, that means those are the areas where we want to direct growth. So those are the areas that we would like to see most of the growth in near Southeast occur. And so these are the areas that we've designated as centers, either community or regional centers, and said, and again, you may recall from the survey and other discussions we've had, we talked about how we want to direct growth, whether concentrating it around Colorado and I-25, spreading it along the corridors. The one that really got the most votes was putting it at key intersections along the corridor. So that's what we're going for here, is picking out some key intersections along Leedsdale, Evans, and Colorado, and saying this is where we expect the most growth to be, where we want to see slightly taller buildings and more investment and more development.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Judy.
Okay, I am in the Indian Creek area here, and this is on the far east. And as you well know, I believe we're built out in that area with townhomes, some single family homes, and some large things. The development in that area is going to come from unincorporated Arapahoe County all along Quebec Way. And we're going to see in there mixed use. Mainly what's going to happen though is that a lot of these single family lots are going to be sold off. And right now they're asking for rezoning to multifamily. So I think I sent you some information on the projected density in that area as unincorporated Arapahoe County begins to build out and change in that area. So mobility is going to be a big issue eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so as we've talked about, we want to make sure we're getting those mobility improvements in place. You'll see, there's a big chunk of Indian Creek that is designated for missing middle. And that's really because those areas already have missing middle housing. There's a lot of duplexes and townhomes and things like that in Indian Creek already, as you well know. So we're not necessarily expecting a lot of change in those areas. Actually, we're just recognizing what is on the ground already there. And then we are, continuing to coordinate with Arapahoe County. They are looking to update their 4 square mile area plan, which is what they call the area around Indian Creek. So they will actually in the next year or so, I believe, be starting their own sort of planning effort around what's going on in that part of unincorporated Arapahoe County. All right. Great. Thanks, Judy. Thanks for those questions. Good questions and comments. Again, this is intended to just sort of highlight the key recommendations. So now we can start getting into some of the more specifics as we go forward. And sort of keep this in mind as we go forward of what the key goals are that we're trying to accomplish with the land use recommendations. So looking at the context designation. So if you remember from when we talked about how Blueprint Denver works and designates sort of future development and land use types, the first stage of that is designating contexts. So there are basically 6 contexts across the city. You can see them down there in the key, ranging from suburban up to urban center, and then with special districts for other types of things. And so that is intended to reflect sort of the pattern of development in these areas. So the majority of this area follows a suburban pattern of development, and we're not recommending to change that at this point. We're not recommending any changes to this context map right now. So we'll continue to follow that suburban pattern of development, although what Blueprint Denver calls for in the suburban pattern of development in the suburban context is creating a more walkable mixed use form of suburban development. So just because it's staying suburban doesn't mean we expect it to be sort of traditional suburban the way you may think of it in the past, but this will be sort of a new form of Denver suburban that, while maintaining the things people like about the suburban areas, will also provide that walkability, that ease of access to things, that variety of uses, and that higher quality of design and usability. So yeah, again, not changing it, mostly staying suburban. There's a few areas of urban edge, as you can see, and then that urban center with a little bit of general urban around Colorado Station. So that provides the basis for the place map, which again, in the blueprint scheme, provides more details on the types of uses and the appropriate scale of development in areas on specific properties. So this is our proposed place map. The areas where we are proposing a change in place type are outlined in black. So you can see those, they should pop out a little bit. But I'll sort of walk through briefly what the intent here is, which is, as we were sort of talking about, directing most of the growth to those centers and corridors, particularly those key centers along those corridors. So we've created new community centers or expanded existing community centers at key intersections along the corridors. So at Leetsdale and Holly, Leetsdale and Monaco, Leetsdale and Quebec, Evans and Monaco, Evans and Holly, and Colorado and Yale, expanded the regional center at Colorado Station to the north side of I-25 to create a bigger regional center there. And then also looking for opportunities to add missing middle housing, as we were talking about. And one of those is, and the one that got the most support from the community, was adding opportunities as transitions from the centers and corridors. So you'll see backing some of these centers and corridors, some new residential low medium places where we can incorporate some of that missing middle housing, but also looking at some opportunities along the larger streets through the residential areas, particularly along Monaco. We've designated a couple of locations where properties fronting Monaco could accommodate townhomes or things like that. And then one other thing I wanted to point out is the industrial area in Indian Creek, leaving where the waste transfer facility recycling center is as value manufacturing, which is sort of a light industrial designation, but changing the southern portion of that to innovation flex, which is still intended to allow industrial uses, but also intended to incorporate some additional types of uses and higher quality design, including residential and commercial and retail uses. So those are sort of the big changes that we're proposing with the place map. So let me know if you have questions or thoughts on that, Dustin.
It's just general feedback. At least for me, the colors are terrible and kind of hard to easily distinguish.
Yeah, sorry about that. These are the official Blueprint Denver colors, so we're kind of stuck with them. We can try to find ways to make this map more readable if folks are struggling with it, but yeah, as far as the color scheme, we need to be consistent with the citywide plans and the other plans. So we kind of have to stick with this general scheme. Any other thoughts or questions on the map or what we're proposing changing or anything like that? Councilman Cashman.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Just the bringing Colorado Center, extending that regional center designation across, I guess that's to where the Best Buy is now, and
Yep.
those shops over there. So I'm assuming that would bring the entirety of that zoning for, I don't know what it's zoned for, 20 stories or whatnot. And is there any connection between the two properties envisioned?
Yes, so yeah, two things. We'll get to the height map here in a minute. But we're not
thank you.
recommending full 20 stories on the north side. We're actually recommending a 12-story base, which would go up to 16 with the EHA incentives. And then, yes, we are proposing, at least investigating, adding an additional crossing of I-25 at Bel Air, I think it is, this street right here. If we could add a new bridge across 25 there.
Okay.
Jared, did you have a question or comment as well?
I was just curious about the building height, but it sounds like we're going to get there. So
Yep.
I was just trying to figure out if I was supposed to be reading that into this map or not. So it doesn't sound like it.
No, there's a whole other map that is all about building heights. So we will move on to that shortly, unless anyone has more questions or comments on this one.
No. Hey, Scott, it's Scott Caldwell.
Hi.
You just mentioned the bridge going across potentially Bel Air. I know years ago there was a possibility for that bridge to go, and it actually didn't work out and ended up going down closer to Evans. Is there an area, a landing spot, or an area on the other side of the highway where that's contemplated, or how would that happen?
Yeah, we haven't gotten into the design of that yet, and I know the grades there are not great. The highway comes back up to basically at grade there, so we'd have to go up or go down for the crossing. So we're still investigating the feasibility of that. So I don't have a good answer for you on that. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So speaking of building heights, want to provide a little context before we look at the height map. But as I mentioned, we do have a map that shows what we intend to be the future maximum heights across the entire plan area. But in areas, so we do want to direct additional growth and additional height to these regional and community centers where we expect to accommodate most of the growth. And make those sort of mixed use areas that are meeting the community's needs by providing affordable housing and a variety of other housing types, jobs, shopping, dining, and entertainment options, and ensure that where that height is allowed, that we have that adequate infrastructure in place or will come in with the new development, and again the improved design requirements, so that the new development and the new growth meets the community's goals and desires for what is happening in those areas. And then we also want to make sure that where we are allowing additional height over what is currently allowed, that we're getting what we call elements of a complete neighborhood or community benefits. That part of that will be handled by the expanding housing affordability incentive program, which you may recall we talked about a while ago, that within the existing zoning, if properties provide additional affordable housing beyond what they're already required to provide, they can get additional height. So some of it will be handled through that, but there are other areas where we are proposing allowing increases in the base height. And in those locations, we want to make sure that for that increase in base height, we're getting additional community benefits. So those could be things like additional open space, space for additional community serving uses or nonprofits, enhanced design or landscaping or mobility options, or improved sustainability things. So we are recommending developing regulations to implement that, so that when taller development comes in, they have to provide these additional community benefits. And until we get those regulations in place, we can address them on a case-by-case basis using other tools. And from what we've heard from the community, the most important needs are additional open space, more mobility or better mobility options, and improved sustainability. And so with that, this is the proposed future height map. The areas with the diagonal hatch are locations where the expanding housing affordability incentives could or would apply in the future. Not all of them currently are eligible because of their zoning. They have old code zoning or industrial zoning that it doesn't apply to, but we expect these properties to rezone into mixed use zone districts within the Denver zoning code, in which case the EHA incentives would apply. So you can see in the key down there at the bottom what the base height is for each of those, and then where that hatch is applicable, what the incentive height would be under EHA. So for Leedsdale and Evans, maintaining mostly 3 stories along those corridors, going up to 5 at some of the community centers that we've designated. Along Colorado, taller heights with sort of 5 or 8 story base, going up to 12 stories on the north side of I-25, and then up to 20 stories on the south side, which is again the current zoning for those areas. And then within the neighborhoods, maintaining the existing 2.5 story maximum, which is what the existing zoning allows. Although, as we've talked about, as we make improvements to the design standards, that may actually come down a little bit to be more consistent with the existing development patterns. And then for the areas where we are looking to add additional missing middle, for the ones that are serving as that transition from the corridors to the residential areas, allowing those to go up to 3 stories. But for the ones that are more integrated into the neighborhood, like the ones proposed along Monaco, those would stay at that 2.5 stories. So they would really be limited to townhomes and things like that.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
Looking at what I believe is Holly in Florida in the green in the middle of the map.
Holly in Florida, yes.
Yeah. Do you know right off the top what it's zoned for today?
2 stories.
It is 2 stories. So we're advising that it stay there.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I should point out the areas with the outline are areas where we are proposing a change from the existing zoning.
Yeah.
Not all of that is an increase. Actually, a lot of them are decreases, because a lot of these are, as we talked about, old code zoning or industrial zoning that either has no height limit or has really high height limits and are governed more by floor area ratio than their building height requirements. So some, yeah, go ahead.
Is staying on Holly. So it looks like the Montessori school property is being rezoned.
Yeah.
Recommended for rezoning.
Again, it has old code zoning that
Yeah.
allows it to go up to 120 feet or something.
Okay, great.
So yeah, we want to keep that
Gotcha.
consistent with the rest of the area.
And what is the box just to the south and east of it?
This,
Yes.
that is a PUD, I believe.
Okay.
So we're just making that consistent with the rest of the
Great.
residential areas.
Thank you.
Kathy,
Oh, yeah. Hi, I'm just curious from what I am thinking is Evans, it looks 3-story. Is that because you're thinking of missing middle housing in there? Or given that it's could maybe take more stories? I'm not sure what the thinking is around that.
Yeah, so most of it is currently zoned for 3 stories. So you can see we're not proposing changes for most of these 3-story areas. And as we've talked about, we want to direct the growth to these centers at the key intersections. So that's where we're proposing increasing the height and maintaining it at the existing 3 stories in between. We were talking with the councilwoman yesterday. She said she was open to potentially allowing more 5-story areas along Evans. So we're certainly open to that if other folks on the steering committee and the community want to see that. But that's the first draft that we took was keeping most of Evans at that 3-story scale.
I didn't know you were talking to her about that.
Yeah, when we did our little tour
I'm just
yesterday,
kidding. That's why I asked the question, because I know she was considering that, so.
yeah, when we did our little tour yesterday of the residential areas, we came back down Evans and talked about the heights on Evans as well.
So just to be, so, I mean, just because Evans seems to be a little more, I don't know what the other people would feel about 5 stories on Evans, or what the steering committee thinks of something like that, given Evans' potential to go maybe one way or the other.
Yeah, certainly. We are open to ideas or suggestions for changes, as I've said. So yeah, if folks on the steering committee think 5 stories makes more sense, or we should expand the 5-story areas around the centers, or think about other ideas for Evans, let us know. Now's a good time to talk about it. I think Chris was up next.
Thanks. Yeah, my question was more on Evans. I think what we've been talking about is really trying to activate areas and create mobility. And I think what comes along with that is some kind of ground level activation. And I think the intent with 3 stories, it'll be challenging to make some kind of ground floor activation really work just with the requirements of heights. I think if you're going to add some kind of ground floor retail, it's going to be really challenging to make a deal actually work to be able to then activate it. So it's going to promote people if they don't need to do an activated commercial use. It's going to promote people to not use it because it's going to almost make it not possible. You almost need a little more height if that's our goal of promoting activity there.
Right.
And I think that's a global comment to even Leedsdale. If you're really trying to make walkable areas, people are going to want to walk to retail. And I think just your clear height alone, when you start designing these things, will make it almost very difficult to work with inside a 3-story height requirement. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And yeah, that's certainly a concern is, if we don't have adequate height to support the types of development and types of uses that we'd like to see. But we are sort of trying to balance that with, again, directing most of that to certain areas. So, the priority for achieving that sort of ground floor activation and active uses on the ground floor is really in the centers. We'd love to see it along the broader stretches of the corridors, but it's not as much of a priority. So maybe it is, maybe it does make sense to concentrate those taller heights at the centers to really make sure we're getting the activation there and not worry about it as much elsewhere. But on the other hand, we've heard from the community that type of pedestrian friendly activation is important. So maybe we do want to think about ways we can get that in more places. So yeah, great comment. Jim.
Hey, Scott, I'm looking at the little triangular kind of piece that is the waste transfer station right on the Cherry Creek.
Yep.
And I see that it's designated as 5-story, future height maximum. To your knowledge, is the waste transfer station going away, or is that just a projection in case it ever does?
Yeah, my understanding from, we have a solid waste management plan that was done a few years ago, and it calls for that to stay there for the foreseeable future. And so, yeah, it is exactly what you said of just in case that someday goes away, we want to have some direction of what the appropriate height there is, but we're certainly not anticipating that leaving within the lifetime of this plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Good question. Judy.
Uh,
You went back on mute there, Judy.
I'm looking at my area.
Yep.
I see the park. And then where I live is right there. It's the square, right? Just above the park. And then there's a triangular area across the street. And that is where Place Middle School is. And then there's an open area in there where that landfill is. Right there is where the landfill is, I believe.
Yep.
Anyway, you've got that at 3 stories. My units at my HOA are 2 stories. So is that something you are looking at changing, or what's the reason for that?
I think we are, I don't think we're changing the height, although it's kind of hard to tell there, for your area. So I think you may be zoned for 3 stories.
It looks like there is a black border
Yeah,
around.
it does look
Thursday.
like that. I can double check what that is.
And then the area across the street has also kind of been a bone of contention because we have no 3 stories out there in Indian Creek at all. And across the street, where Place Middle School is, at one time they were proposing a 3-story building there, which the other neighborhood association on the other side of that was opposed to, as we were on my side in the Indian Creek RNO. And the other one is Linwood RNO. I don't know if there's anybody there tonight from Linwood, but anyway, that's kind of a scary look there if we're looking at 3 stories in that area. Don't know as,
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
yes.
So your property is old code zoning, it's zone R2, which is an FAR based zone district, so it doesn't actually have a height limit. So that's why the change is that we are actually imposing a 3-story future height limit on that. So if that's not appropriate, we can change it. As I said, this is a first draft. But yeah, that's why your area is showing up as a change to 3 stories, because it's actually coming down from no height limit.
Right.
And then as far as the west side of Quebec there, yeah, we know there's been proposals for development on that area where the solar panels are, and there was some concern about that, but we do think it makes sense as a potential site for some additional missing middle housing. And so that's why we're proposing that to go up to 3 stories. But we want to hear from the community whether that actually makes sense or not.
You're going to hear from the community.
Great, that's what we want.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
Thank you. It seemed like there were a few other folks who had hands up earlier, but maybe they went down. So if anyone else has thoughts or questions on the height map, jump
Yes,
in.
I have my hand up. I think I had the same question somebody else asked earlier about the Evans. It feels like that we've had a lot of conversations about Evans and just still trying to sort out. Obviously, they're still building the current round of not even, I guess it's 1 story. A very large gas station is 1 story. So if we're trying to get something other than more large gas stations, I'm not sure how exactly to entice that, but that would be the only question that I had. Because it's kind of odd that we have the 8 to 12 and then we have the 5 to 7, but for the majority of Evans in the plan, we're keeping it. It seems to be kind of where it is. So that I think it's not a recommendation, but just a question of what's the best way to approach kind of, is this the best smart people's insights on how to help Evans develop the way that we would want to see it?
Yeah, and that is a good question. And yeah, we think this is what makes sense. We have, and we'll talk about this in a minute, we have a whole bunch of other recommendations around the types of development and the form of development that will also help address concerns like more one-story gas stations. But a lot of times the best practice in locations like this is to sort of target a few areas at first to serve as the catalyst. If we said the whole area, again, maybe this is the right thing to do. So take this with a grain of salt. But one argument would be if we raise the allowance for the entire area to 5 stories, it would spread out development. There wouldn't be that concentration at the key locations that we've identified that would then serve as the catalyst for improving those areas, and then that serve to spread out. Once we have that increased density at those areas that's functioning well, then the other areas adjacent to it will also start to see redevelopment. So that is the thinking of part of the thinking of targeting a few areas like this is they can serve as the sort of the leaders for development in the area, make sure those areas function well, and then we'll see development spread out from that. But like I said, that's sort of an idea that we have and we think is a good idea, but we want to hear from other folks if they think there are other opportunity areas that we should be considering, or we need to consider other things like Chris was talking about with getting the ground floor activation. That's another consideration that we need to balance. So yeah, these are, as I keep saying, these are our first drafts of this, so we are certainly open to alternative ideas or proposed changes. All right, anything else on the heights? All right, so we can get into a few more of the recommendations here. We have a ton of recommendations covering redevelopment of these centers and corridors and design guidelines. I didn't want to copy all of those into PowerPoint and ask you to read them. There are pages and pages of it. Our Word doc of all of these recommendations is about 25 pages long. And that's without the maps or any of the graphics in it. So that's just 25 pages of text that you'll get a chance to review in the future. So I just wanted to highlight the sort of high-level recommendations around mixed-use design and development in centers and corridors. So these are the broad policies. I don't know if we've talked about this, but the way our recommendations are formatted is we have policies, and then underneath those we have strategies that provide more details. So these are the policies that address mixed-use design and development in centers and corridors. So trust me, there's pages of strategies that go under each one of these. And if you have questions about any of them, I'm happy to talk about them. But wanted to focus more on the maps tonight. So briefly, the mixed-use design, we want to improve mixed-use design in mixed-use areas to create that character that we've heard from the community that they want, that walkable, attractive place that they want to spend time. And then thinking about how we want to achieve that, looking at how we can sort of phase the redevelopment of the corridors, as we were just talking about, of targeting certain areas to redevelop first, and then thinking about how that will proceed over the course of 10 or 20 years to eventually achieve the form that the community would like to see, making sure that we get those mobility and design improvements that come along with that, and increasing the opportunities for the uses that we want, such as affordable housing, more entertainment and dining options, more local retail and things like that. For the local centers, so mostly Florida and Holly, but we also have a few other local centers designated around, making sure that those continue to serve as places where community members can easily get their daily goods and needs and services met, and providing those sort of local gathering places that you can just pop down to, meet your friends, get a coffee, get some basic shopping, or go to dinner or things like that. And then for the larger centers, the regional and community centers, making sure that those evolve into these really mixed use destinations that have a really broad range of uses that really serve the community, the folks who live in them and nearby, and people coming to visit, and have the design and that mix of uses that makes them really community assets. So before we move on from these, any general thoughts or questions around recommendations for mixed use design or development and redevelopment in the centers and corridors? Councilman.
Yeah, Scott, I've just been thinking about this. Early on in our discussions, there seemed to have been a lot of comments about bringing some form of cultural center, entertainment center. And I know I'd seen it mentioned in passing. I wonder if it would make sense or if it's appropriate in this process to see if we can't come to some sort of agreement on where that might be located, rather than leave it as vague as it is. So just wanted to throw that out on the table.
Yeah, we're certainly open to providing more detail around that. Right now the recommendations are that this is something that the community is very interested in, and we should take various steps to try to pursue that without getting into too many specifics of what exactly that would look like or where it should go. But if community and the steering committee would like more certainty around that or more detail around that, we can work on developing that.
If I could just add to that, under some of the business recommendations, we look at doing a feasibility study for locations, but also frequency, but also feasibility for a business venture, calling that out as something that could be an expansion of a business or a new business opportunity. So looking if it's a public space or more of a commercial option. So, but like as Scott said, if we want to do a little bit more pinpointing, we're open to ideas there.
And Councilwoman Black was saying yesterday that, apparently Carvana's having a few struggles, and so that new Carvana location right there at I-25 in Evans may have to become something else, and she was suggesting a nightclub for it. So, if that's something we want to pursue, that's something we can look at. I told her that was something she should do after she leaves council this summer. That could be her next job.
Yes.
Please don't, Scott, honestly.
I don't know how you repurpose that building.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah. Councilman Cashman, you brought that up in the rezoning, I believe.
It would go down as one of the best things that Denver ever did was repurpose a Carvana before it ever opened. If you could pull that off, Scott, you would go down as a legend in city planning history.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll try to make that happen. Well, I mean, hopefully they're successful and we don't have to worry about it, but we'll see it if it comes to pass. All right. Anything else on centers and corridors before we move along to residential? All right, so we'll get into some residential maps here in a minute, but wanted to again provide some of the high-level policies around the residential recommendations. First, So first looking at the multi-unit areas. So thinking back to the place map, those are the low, medium, and high residential places. So making sure that we are providing a variety of housing options in those areas that are all high quality and well designed and serve the needs of the community while finding ways to increase affordability, both income restricted and also what we call market rate or naturally occurring affordable by preserving some of the older units while making sure that they are maintained well and also providing new affordable units. And then looking at the residential low areas, which are that light yellow, the majority of the area on that, thinking back to that places map, which is the single unit and 2-unit areas. So as we've talked about, we want to improve the design for new construction and additions to help maintain affordability and accommodate new housing options while preserving the character that folks like and preserving some of those design features. So by reducing the sort of building envelope there, we hope that we can preserve that character, preserve some of the affordability, but also find ways to add some new housing options. And then getting more into the housing options, looking at ways we can use the addition of housing options as ways to promote these other goals around preservation, affordability, preventing displacement in these areas. So we'll talk about that here. So yeah, let's go through these. Councilman Cashman.
Yeah, Scott, when we, as we talked about the possibility of limiting the building envelope to maintain affordability, do you envision in this process that we simply leave the statement general rather than say, we want to limit it to 2,700 square feet or whatever?
Yes, yeah, I think we will want to leave that up to the future regulatory process of getting into those details. We want to clearly articulate what the goals and the community's desires are around that and some of the issues. But yeah, getting to that level of detail is probably not the role of this plan. It'll be a future process that will provide more or involve more analysis and more community input and all that stuff. Great, thanks. Good question. All right, so speaking of preservation, you saw this on the framework map back at the beginning. These are the preservation priority areas that we have designated. This is based on what we've heard from the community. We asked folks, if you remember back to the surveys we did at the beginning of this year, we asked folks to mark on a map areas where they liked the design character and would like to see that preserved. So it's partly based on that and also based on our historic analysis. So Virginia Village has had a Discover Denver survey done, and the other 4 neighborhoods had historic context done by a consultant before we started this process. And so through those analyses, we've identified additional areas that have consistent design that is representative of the design at the time they were built. So most of this was built in the middle of the 20th century, the 50s and 60s. So some people may not think of that as design worth preserving or parts of it. Obviously, some of the high quality mid-century modern, I think most people appreciate, but there's some other types besides that are good representations of styles from that period that may have value for preserving into the future. So we want to look at ways that we can encourage or allow preservation in those areas. So some of that is through the zoning improvements we were just talking about by reducing the building envelope, reducing the incentive to scrape and put in a much larger new house. That can help just provide a general level of preservation. And then also, as we were talking about a few minutes ago, looking at these other potential tools ranging from the landmark district to things like the conservation overlay that Crescenta Park already has, to things like a pattern book, which will help folks who want to do an addition do it the right way, and other tools that can help promote preservation. So that is the intent. And, like I said, this is our first draft of this map. So if you have questions about why one area is included or another's not, or anything like that, we're certainly open to feedback on any of those. Dustin.
Yeah, so I guess this is for Goldsmith, and Erica might have a differing opinion. So that's on the list. And I like my neighborhood. It's a nice neighborhood. I certainly wouldn't say the houses are stunning by any means. They're a long rectangle, mostly single story. So curious as to why that decision was made more specifically, if you have that at hand. And again, the last thing I would want is some kind of conservation on this neighborhood, because then it's like, oh, all the plans I had for the next few years, well, I guess I'm stuck with the kitchen that was already updated in the 90s, because I can't change that now unless I jump through many hoops. So
yeah, a couple things. One is pretty much all of these rules wouldn't impact what you do on the inside. We really only care about the outside of the house. So if you want to gut your kitchen and replace it, you still need a building permit for that, but you don't have to jump through additional hoops, even if you're in a landmark district. If you need to expand your kitchen, that's when you would have to go through additional hoops.
yeah, and I think that's probably, I mean, Erica, you certainly went through this. You just popped the top, and I know our neighbor, they pushed out their back because the living space at the back is a whole 12-foot wide, which made sense when you had a galley kitchen and a 4-top round table. But for people who want to live here long term and more space, then I'm not sure that's that's something people would really appreciate. Like I said, not a lot to these designs to be, worthwhile.
Yeah. So yeah, and then to answer your other question, it again, I think was mostly driven by sort of the consistency of these. And I think actually the west side of Goldsmith Gulch was called out by the historic context. Our consultant identified that as an area with really consistent design of that style. And then the east side of the Gulch came from the community input that we got. Several folks saying that it was an area that they liked and would like to see preservation there.
Curious to say what Erica says.
Yeah, go ahead, Erica.
Hi, I'm just wondering, like, wouldn't you say preservation, so I just popped the top, like as Dustin said, and basically we're one of 2 houses in the whole, I guess 3, that have a second story above ground level. And I'm wondering, like, under this guideline, would I have been able to do that? I mean, we did, like I said, we tried to do pieces of board and batten. We tried to do things that kind of made the house fit into the neighborhood as much as possible, but we did like paint our brick so it would match the top part of the house, things like that. I'm just wondering, what would the constraints be?
Yeah, and that would depend on the tool that was used and the specifics of that tool. So, if a design overlay or conservation overlay were to be put in place, it would impact specific aspects, but could leave others to the base zoning or be less restrictive. So like the Crescenta Park conservation overlay does limit the height of buildings. You may have noticed on the height map that it was at 1.5 stories. So if it were something like that, that would prohibit popping the top. But there are other conservation overlays that we have elsewhere in the city that wouldn't necessarily prohibit that. and impact and address things more like setbacks or the location of garages and porches and things like that. So again, it would have to be depending on the tool and the specifics of the tool. What are the important elements that the community wants to preserve? And again, the important thing to keep in mind is that we're not going to come in and say, slap a landmark district or a conservation overlay on you. We're going to say this is an area where we've heard from the community that they think there's valuable character that should be preserved or could be preserved. Here are an array of tools that could be used to achieve that. And then if the community wants to come forward and say, yeah, we want to take advantage of one of these tools, we would like to apply for a landmark district or a conservation overlay or something like that, then we would work with them to figure out those exact details. But
okay, so for now, it's just more of a recommendation, and it's, it would take a lot more to kind of get us there, because I think I would be very interested in preserving the character of the neighborhood, but still allowing things like what we just did to happen.
Right.
I would hate to see like a big modern structure come into our neighborhood. But I don't want to be the only pop top forever. So
And I guess to that point, Erica, like I would hate to see something from Lowry or that side of town pop up in our neighborhood. It certainly isn't part of the aesthetic. But let's say I win lotto tomorrow and I'm like, you know what, I really like our neighborhood. But instead of having to deal with the house that's 60 years old, I want to scrape this and do a modern take on this ranch.
Mhm.
Would that stop me from doing that? It's still going to be a ranch with the same general boxy shape, but it, maybe there's a little bit more modern flair to it. So it's, how far is that line?
But it sounds like you're saying, Scott, that this is not going to do that. This is not going to prevent that at this point. That would be a whole another layer of steps that the neighborhood would go through.
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
You don't need to worry at this point.
Right. That's a good thing to keep in mind that we've talked about in the past, but just to remind everyone that, the plan is a policy document. It says what the city should be doing, should implement through regulations or fund, but it doesn't actually change what you can do. So,
Okay.
regulations, thinking back to the height map, just putting that in the plan won't actually change what the allowed heights are. Properties would have to rezone to achieve that. That could be either city-led rezoning or property owners coming in to rezone. So same thing here. We're saying these are areas where we think there are things that could or should be preserved, but it would take a future process to actually implement that. So this plan will not create any new regulations on its own. There would have to be a follow-up process to do that. And then, yeah, to Dustin's point or question, depending on what the tool is, again, if it is a landmark district, that would probably prevent you from demolishing the house. But if it is a conservation overlay or a design overlay or just changes to the zoning, that would not prevent what you just described. You could tear down the house, and as long as what you built fit into whatever the regulations are, that would be allowed.
Yeah, I guess the only other point I'd make is I'd be curious to see the total number of respondents in the neighborhood that said that. Also being aware that, and no offense to anyone on the call, but our neighborhood is a very old neighborhood. On our street, there's 2 or 3 original owners from 1968, and people who moved in shortly thereafter. So it is certainly one of those ones where it's like, this is a 20-year plan. The fact of the matter is a lot of my neighbors aren't going to be here in 20 years. So yeah,
and if as you and your neighbors review this, you think it doesn't make sense for this to be a preservation priority area, we can change this in the map. Like I said, this is our first draft based on the information we have at this point, but we want to hear from your neighbors. We want to hear from you on whether you think it makes sense or not. All right, anything else on the preservation priority areas? Right. Moving on to the anti-displacement priority areas. So again, this was on that framework map we looked at the beginning. These are areas that we think may be vulnerable to displacement based either on their scores in our vulnerability to displacement index from Blueprint Denver, which looks at how many renters are in an area, the income levels in the area, and the levels of education in the area. Those are the sort of three factors that go into those. Or we also looked at property values and areas where the land value was greater than the structure value. We consider those areas also vulnerable to displacement, more likely to be bought by somebody and scraped and a new house put in. So these are areas where we particularly want to focus on affordability. So again, through those zoning improvements that we've talked about, by reducing the amount that you can build, basically, we're reducing that incentive for folks to buy the property and totally scrape it and put in that giant house. We don't want to necessarily prevent things like Dustin was talking about if you want to put in something that fits in with the neighborhood. But the things you were concerned about, the stuff you see in Lowry or something like that, that would be totally out of place in the neighborhood, preventing that from happening. And then also looking at programs and policies to help prevent displacement. So these are areas where we want to target things like temporary utility assistance or property tax rebates to help folks who may be sort of on the edge of potentially losing their home. If we can make a few small things to help them to keep them in their home, it's much better to do that than to address it after they've lost their home and we're trying to get them into new houses or things like that. So that's the idea with the anti-displacement priority areas. Jared.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the last map looked like. This almost feels like a if you laid one on top of the other, the whole thing is protected by either displacement or preservation. Yeah, is my imagination. Okay, no. So the majority of it it's going to have some overlay on the majority, at least of the residential neighborhood.
Yes, the majority of the residential low areas fall into one of these categories, and on the next map, you'll see them together again. So
thanks.
We can look at that in more detail. And again, keep in mind that just because they have one of these designations doesn't necessarily mean that something will happen, right? That whatever we are recommending here will have to come through an additional follow-up process, and there would be more details in figuring that out and refining what that means. So yeah, so the idea is maybe not think of these as overlays, but just again priority areas that these are the areas that we particularly want to focus these policies around these areas. There could be areas outside of these where some of these policies make sense, and there may be some locations within these some properties within these where these policies don't make sense. But these are sort of grouping areas together as areas we want to focus either affordability or preservation recommendations. All right, so let's go to then the sort of combined residential policy guidance map. So this is exactly as Jared was saying, combining the two maps we just looked at, and then also looking at where we think duplexes could potentially be appropriate. And as I mentioned at the beginning, that is mostly based on where we think they have adequate infrastructure to support them. And as we've talked about, just by having this designation does not mean that duplexes would automatically be allowed, or even that people could come in as soon as this plan is adopted and apply to rezone their properties to allow duplexes. that the recommendations are very clear that we need to get the design recommendations in place and these other policies around affordability and preservation in place before we start seeing duplexes allowed in these areas. So the areas with the outline are areas where duplexes could be allowed under certain conditions. The sort of purplish areas, or one that says duplex, whatever color that is on your screen. Those are areas where they would be allowed potentially. Again, just once we get the regulations in place, people could at that stage apply for a duplex. For the preservation incentive and anti-displacement incentive areas, those are areas where the duplex and that priority area overlap. So in the preservation incentive areas, you would only be allowed to get the duplex if you preserve the existing house. And then in the anti-displacement priority areas, you would only be allowed to get the duplex if you made it income restricted, made it maintain affordability for a long period of time. So in those areas, we're using the potential to add additional units as a further incentive to achieve these goals around preservation and affordability. Jared.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm just trying to make sure that I read that. So if you're south of Cherry Creek, where you have like Holly in Florida, that's like a dark purple area. I can't tell how many different colors are laying on top of that. Is that area just preservation? Is it preservation and duplex?
Yeah, so this area is preservation and duplex.
Okay. And then the
as
one
is-
underneath that would be preservation and duplex as well?
As is this one, yes. And
Okay.
then this is anti-displacement and duplex, sort of in between.
Oh, okay. I thought the color duplex down on your code, it had like, at first I just thought there was like just a very few places of duplex because of the just purple color, the light purple color.
Right,
But you're saying anything that's outlined is actually duplex.
correct. And that doesn't mean that we expect these areas to become entirely duplex. The idea is that we would be allowing property owners under certain conditions to apply for a duplex. So we are not anticipating or expecting that these areas would completely change over or add a new unit on every property, but that these would be sprinkled in for people who want to pursue that. Again, meeting the other conditions.
I rarely care about my friends who live south of the creek since I live north of the creek, but I'm going to speak for them on this moment because, you know, we seem to be fine up here in north of the creek without any lines around us. But for my friends who live south of the creek, what would be the reason then that all of my friends who have their house for sale wouldn't sell to somebody who had the funds to buy it and put a duplex on there, following all the preservation incentives? Right. So like my imagination is my more business savvy friends would sell their house very quickly to somebody who has the money to preserve the mid-century look, but put two houses on one lot.
Right. Yeah, and if that's what they wanted to do, that would make sense, right? That
I mean, I would say like anybody who was given the opportunity to get a whole lot of money for their house and doesn't care about what happens to the neighborhood after they leave it would seem to be that they would take that as an offer, right? Like it seems to be that, so it's kind of happened in other neighborhoods is as soon as you allow somebody to say two houses for the price of one, there's enough people who are smart and know how to make money on this that it would seem to be that would be all of Virginia Village at that point.
Yeah, it doesn't happen that quickly, as we found in other areas where we have said duplexes should be allowed that are currently zoned single unit. We get a few, but there's not a huge rush of people coming in to rezone their properties. And we think with the additional policies and restrictions we're proposing that would limit it even further. But yeah, absolutely, that folks could take a look at this and say, oh, if I could, if somebody's going to offer me more than I think my house is worth to come in and turn it into a duplex or add a second unit, I'm going to take it. And
I mean, it feels like the way unfortunately the math has worked in other neighborhoods is currently no house is worth $1 million in the neighborhood. But for a developer, it's worth $1 million if I can split the lot and put 2 houses up for, 700,000. He makes money, and then the neighborhood actually changes a whole lot faster than anybody thought, because it's just kind of simple math of
Right.
people who have money can make decisions that those of us who live in the neighborhood would never make.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a concern. And like I said, we think we are recommending policies that would mitigate that.
Yeah.
But
Is there a reason? I guess maybe just to last question. Sorry, I saw Mr. Cashman, your hands up. Why so much of Virginia Village?
Again, that was mostly driven by where the infrastructure is in place. So it has sort of the best connected street grid in near Southeast. And so we think it can support some additional density in those areas. But again, as I've been saying all night, these are our first take at these. And so if we need to scale this back, or if there are areas on here that you think don't make sense, or areas where you think it does make sense to consider duplexes, we are open to changes to these maps.
Yeah, I think at least, I could talk to my friends down on the south side of the creek. I think that they would at least want to see some level of preservation, either one of those blocks or the other, but not have the sense of like our whole neighborhood, it could very quickly become duplex. So
yeah,
like if the maps are actually open to edits, it would seem, at least in scale to the whole Southeast area plan, to not have all of Virginia Village zoned for potential duplex. So there's my 2 cents on the fire.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's good input. And I do want to point out that one of the other things we're looking at is potentially piloting these recommendations in a smaller area to try to address, your concern that you were talking about, that if we get them wrong, it could go wrong very quickly. So that if we try it out in one smaller location, we have time to fine tune them before we apply them to a larger area. Councilman Cashman.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Help me out, the preservation area with duplex. What I thought I heard you say is you'd be able to build a duplex if you preserve the existing structure. So what does that look like? So you divide the structure in half, you add a second unit attached to it. What are we doing?
Yeah, it could be either of those. And again, we'll need to get the design in place, the design regulations in place. But yeah, it could be you build a second unit on the back of the existing house, or it could be you divide the existing house into 2 units and maybe combine that also with another addition to give, because a lot of these houses are fairly small as it is, and dividing it in half would not really be livable.
Yeah.
So yeah, it will likely be some combination of dividing existing houses and adding addition on the back or inappropriate locations.
I'm wondering, I'm wondering what preserving the existing structure actually means. Does it mean preserving the bulk of the structure, or is this a case where you maintain one wall in the bathroom and you're grandfathered in?
Right. Yeah, and that would all be defined what exactly that means in the regulatory process. But yeah, the intent is that you would maintain the bulk of the structure, that we're trying to preserve these houses. So yeah, if you just keep the front facade, that's not really achieving these goals.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for asking those. felt like there was another thing I was going to say, but I'm blanking on it now. So we'll go to Kathy.
Just a quick question, because with the ADU, the other thing that's going on, talking about the impact on the neighbors, on your neighbors. So if you're talking about preserving the character of a neighborhood and you're allowing, if the structure is too small to divide, to create 2 units, and you're allowing them maybe to build to the back, is there going to be any kind of design recommendations in place that would prevent the encroachment of, light or privacy or anything else on the neighbors who do not choose to maybe do this kind of thing or stay in their home?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that reminds me of what I was going to say. But yes, that is something that we would address as we get the design regulations in place. And what I was going to say is that we would need to create a zone district to implement this. As we saw earlier, this area is mostly suburban context. There is not a suburban 2-unit zone district in our zoning code today. So even if somebody came in today and said, I want to rezone to a 2-unit zone district, we don't have one that would fit in this area. So we're going to have to create that suburban 2-unit zone district, and it will address exactly the things that Kathy was talking about, of making sure that it fits in, it doesn't have negative impacts on the neighbors. And that's where, even if we say duplexes could be appropriate in this area, not every property necessarily would be able to do it. They may not have the room on their property or, with where their existing house sits, if it's a preservation area, to even fit a duplex or an addition to accommodate a duplex on it. So again, it wouldn't necessarily impact every property. It would be only on the properties that can accommodate it within the regulations that we create to make sure that it fits in. All right. Unless there's any other questions, we can move on to another thing that I think might be a little controversial here. So hold on to your hats. So another thing we want to look at is lot sizes. And the majority of the area is zoned SSUD, which has a 6,000 square foot minimum lot size. Most of the properties are around that 6,000 square foot size. But there are some that are larger and they're sort of scattered throughout. It's not necessarily a one area that has a concentration of these larger lots. A lot of times things like corner lots are larger, or things like that. So we want to look at opportunities for folks to split those lots that are above a certain size. So in the 6,000 square foot areas, if you have a lot that's larger than, say, 9,000 square feet, you could potentially split that into 2 4,500 square foot or larger lots. This would still fit in generally with the character of the area, while allowing some additional units to squeeze in there. And then there are a few areas that have larger minimum lot sizes of 9,000 square feet. So similar idea, but the minimum to split it would be at 12,000 square feet. And, again, all the same stuff we were talking about previously would apply, that we need to get the design in place first, so that we're not seeing people, exactly as Jared was talking about, seeing an opportunity to sell up, split the lot, put in 2 way more expensive houses, way bigger houses that don't fit in. That we need to get these other policies and regulations in place before we allow this kind of stuff to happen. Dustin.
So just curious for context, how forget the neighborhood, South Pearl Street, that way. So their lot sizes are smaller. You don't happen to know what zoning they are and what size lots they happen to be?
I don't know off the top of my head. Our zone districts range from 3,000 square foot minimum is the smallest. If if you look at the zoning, the letter at the end of the single unit zoning tells you the lot size. So A is the smallest, and that's 3,000. B is typically 4,500. C, I believe, is 5,500. D is 6,000. So those may be, and that can also vary by context. So I think a lot of those are in that B or C range.
And then I guess the numbers that you came up here with, 9,000 being 45 and 12,000 being 6. Where were they pulled from?
It was actually relating to those zone district lot sizes that those are the breaks that we recognize in the zoning code. So by getting to 9,000, that allows you to create 2 of those 4,500 square foot, which are again a standard zone lot size within our zone district or zoning code, and same with 12,000 and 6,000. That by setting it at that minimum, we know we have zone districts that will accommodate those lot sizes.
Okay.
Erica.
Would we be able to possibly also include maintaining the same setbacks, or, what is it, still a setback when it's the difference between you and your neighbor?
Mhm.
I guess if somebody wanted to, I wouldn't be very prone to saying yes, if it were, yes, you could split your lot size to 4,500 square feet and then somebody built to the very edges of that property.
Right.
I think if there were still the same amount of space in between properties, I suppose I don't see a problem with that. It would just be if they're maximizing the house they put on the
Right.
property, that's where I think I'd begin to have a problem, because it would really change the look and feel.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I don't know that we call out that specifically, but that's a good thing that we should call out, that the side setbacks and the rear setbacks should stay the same as the surrounding area, so that you're not able to build closer to your lot line after splitting the lot. I think that's a good suggestion.
Wait, can I just chime in? I don't think a lot of these homes are actually built to the maximum of the setbacks allowed, actually. So people may not think that it's going to change if somebody adds an addition, but if the setback is 10 feet from the back fence and there's no alley, then you have, the neighbor has a additional structure 10 feet from their back fence that they may be looking into. Just
and that gets back to the sort of general design improvement recommendations that we want to look at, right sizing those setback requirements, because as you said, a lot of these houses are much smaller than what could be built under the current zoning, and are further from the lot lines than they have to be. And so, we want to, as we make these improvements to, reduce the bulk of these buildings, part of it will be adjusting those setback requirements so that they are more appropriate for the existing built form than what the current regulations allow.
I personally don't have an issue with it. I also come from a place where that was the intent of larger blocks, was to subdivide them as population grew. But I guess the question is, isn't this kind of contrary to what the city has already put in place? So are they planning on amending that as well to subdivide blocks?
Sorry, I don't know that I understood your
I
question.
thought with the whole rezoning that happened 10 plus years ago and everything, and all the SSDs and all that. The
Right.
whole point of that was so people couldn't subdivide blocks. So is the city now looking at saying, well, maybe that was a bit too short-sighted and now we need to reverse some of that?
Yeah, I think it's again, this would only apply to a few properties scattered around the area. So I think the idea is that we don't want to see entire blocks be re-subdivided into smaller parcels. That's not what we're proposing. We generally want to keep the same lot sizes across the area, but there are a few opportunities with some of these larger lot sizes to add a few extra units. And so it seems like a good opportunity. So I don't think it's a full sort of rethink of a policy around discouraging further lot splits or re-subdivision. But it's really sort of targeting a few opportunity areas to help meet our housing goals.
Okay. I mean, I'm just looking around our neighborhood again for what Zillow's worth, because I don't know an easier way to find lot sizes. And, for the most part, most lot sizes around us are in the 8,000 mark, with, like you said, the corner lots being, a few of them being the 9,000 limit. So it would be a pretty small number of lots that would even be able to do this if they decided to.
Right, exactly. And that's the intent. It's just a few of those larger lots, again, typically mostly on corners, that this would apply to. Jared.
Yeah, just to clarify, you don't need to split the lot for the duplex. Is that correct? Or does the duplex stay on a single lot? So I guess I'm just trying to figure out, do we end up with potential corner lots with two duplexes? Like, it could split the lot and it could put a duplex on each of them. So now we're at 4 2-story,
Right.
in a single family home neighborhood.
Yes. Yeah, right now, that would potentially be an option in the areas where we're saying duplexes could be allowed. If they have the larger lots. To your initial question, yes, duplexes are 2 units on 1 lot. So somebody could split a lot and then put a duplex on each one. We can, add additional recommendations to address that concern if that's something that you think we need to do. But
yeah, I'm just trying to think back of all of the input from at least the neighbors that I've been talking to. There's a lot of interest in ADU. There's a lot of interest in creative ways to stay in the neighborhood and maybe move like mothers in the neighborhood. I haven't heard a lot of people saying, what I'm hoping is like the corner lots turn into 2 duplexes.
Right.
So that I somewhere it feels like either the duplex or the splitting of the lots needs to be constrained,
right.
So that we don't end up too far too fast.
Yeah.
Because again, I'm just trying to read the policy as any business guy would, who's gonna maximize the opportunity. The people that are not in the neighborhood, I think, are just interested in maximizing opportunity. So I think figuring out what tools to guide that, either the duplex overlay or the lot splitting, would seem to be putting both of those in the same neighborhood does not seem to be how we preserve the neighborhood.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So we'll take another look at that. All right, any other comments or questions on the lot size policy here? All right, just a couple more slides to go through here. So speaking of ADUs, these are our ADU recommendations, which, as we've talked about, are intended to implement the outcome of the ADUs in Denver project that is currently going on, that will update the regulations for suburban context areas, among other things. And so we want to get those implemented, and then the idea is that anyone who wants an ADU would be able to come in and apply to rezone that, or we could sort of proactively rezone some areas or all of the areas to allow for ADUs. We asked folks if they were interested in a proactive rezoning of their neighborhood. Virginia Village had the strongest response in favor of that. So based on that, that would be sort of the primary candidate if we did want to do a proactive rezoning. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that, as we were just talking about with the lot splits, these are intended to be complementary with the other recommendations, so that even if you pursued the duplex option or the lot split option, you could also do an ADU with that. So you could end up with properties with a duplex and an ADU on one property. Councilman Cashman.
Yeah, Scott, you said that Virginia Village responded heavily with interest towards rezoning to allow ADUs. Do you know, I mean, how many responses is that?
I don't know off the top of my head. We can.
If you could get that, that'd be great. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions or comments on the ADU policies here? All right, so this is the last slide. Again, getting back to sort of those high level policies for the other topics in the land use and built form section. First around the industrial areas and the other special districts, which are mostly like campuses. Updating the design standards in those and incorporating mixes of community serving uses and affordable housing as appropriate, with improvements to mobility options as well. So again, there's a whole series of more detailed strategies and recommendations intended to implement that. And then updating some of the other regulations. This is where we talk about getting all of those former Chapter 59 properties into the Denver zoning code, making some general improvements to the Denver zoning code, and also looking at other opportunities to promote green buildings and other sustainability goals with our zoning and building code regulations. And then the last one is around community in Near Southeast. So looking at ways to strengthen that sense of community and connection, facilitating interactions and providing more opportunities for community events so that there's more sense of community in the area, more connection between different parts of the area, that folks feel that sense of identity in Near Southeast and their neighborhoods. Any questions on any of these? All right. Any questions or comments on, as we've talked through all of this, anything pop back into your head of something we talked about earlier, or anything that you think we didn't cover that you expected to see in the land use regulations or anything like that?
I just like the that you tossed out the possibility of piloting on some of the more controversial issues.
Yeah, great. We'll make sure that's clear in the recommendations. All right. If no one else has any more questions, as I said, if you want to get a copy of this and spend a little more time looking at the maps or anything, let me know. I'm happy to send you a PDF. But please don't spread it really beyond the steering committee at this stage. As we've talked about, we still need to make quite a few updates and improvements to these before they go out to the general public. But our goal, as I said, is to get the draft plan out about a month from now, the week of November 14th. So that's when we'll be pushing our sort of last major round of community engagement before the adoption process. So again, we'll be looking for your help in spreading the word and collecting feedback from your friends and neighbors in the area and helping us refine the draft plan. All right, so thanks, everybody. This was a lot of really good input. Really appreciated all your thoughtful comments on this and taking the time to help us work through this. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll talk to you next month.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Scott.
Scott.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. See you later.